All right. Well, thanks for joining me for this new video series called The Spoonful. Why don't you take a minute to just introduce yourself?
Certainly. So my name's Madonna Mcguire Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Pacific Northwest Bleeding Disorders, and PNWBD represents people in all of Oregon and the counties of Southwest Washington living with chronic bleeding disorders.
Thank you. Yeah, you guys do great work, especially in Oregon around the copay accumulator issue, which I know is a priority that we share. Um, I find that it's always very difficult to explain what copay accumulators are to people. But you do this all the time, and I know that you are in this advocacy effort frequently. Could you just explain, to someone who might not know what a copay accumulator is, could you just explain what it is and where patient advocacy groups like yours come from as they approach these policy issues?
Absolutely. So to begin with, my family is affected with bleeding disorders. We actually have two kinds of bleeding disorders in our family, von Willebrand's disease and hemophilia. And we were hit by an accumulator in 2020. So I completely understand it, unfortunately, from a personal perspective, but also from a professional situation. So let me just talk a little bit about the basics of an accumulator. So we like to use the phrase all copays count rather than accumulators because accumulators are just an insurance phrase that is not really, it doesn't do a great job of explaining what it is. So the basic concept is you get money from a manufacturer copay assistance program, not a coupon. We're not talking about coupons here. Coupons are completely different situations. So we're talking about drugs that come from specialty pharmacies or need to come through a specialty pharmacy situation, not through your regular storefront pharmacy. So it's not a coupon you might get for your asthma medicine or your thyroid medicine or something like that. We're not talking about that. We're actually talking about really expensive meds that need to come through a specialty pharmacy. And then what happens is the copays, so the manufacturers decided, it was probably about 7 or 8 years ago, the manufacturers said, hey, these people that are on private insurance are having to meet their out-of-pocket max every year because they're really expensive medicines. So you hit your deductible, then you hit your out-of-pocket max. So they came up with this great system that said, look, we're going to give you a copay card, which will actually pay for your insurance costs for the medicines only, not for all the other stuff. So when you go to the doctor, if you see a nutritionist, if you see a chiropractor, all these other things, it does not pay. It only pays for the cost of the medicine. So they helped. They actually, those manufacturer copay assistance plans were designed to help you meet your out-of-pocket max and not go broke every year. So my family alone, at the time we started to get these, we were paying $7,500 a year in out-of-pocket costs for our insurance, and it was just more than we could afford. So the copay assistance plan finally helped us so that we weren't spending our entire savings every January because our kids are on medicines at the very first order. We end up hitting our out-of-pocket max. So these copay plans came out. It was super awesome, really helped us. And then the ACA passed, and it had already passed, and insurance was looking at ways to get loopholes or ways to get more money. And so they found a loophole that allowed them to collect all of the money on the copay card. So if your manufacturer gives you a copay assistance of 15,000, even though you don't need that much, they put the same amount on everybody with a certain drug. So let's say you're on hemophilia A drug and you're from a well-known manufacturer, and that manufacturer says everybody with hemophilia A that's on this drug gets $15,000. Now, we don't know how much you need, but at least we know that it's going to be 15,000 is going to be enough to cover you. So what insurance was doing was they would, if you go your out-of-pocket max let's say it's 5,000. So the first month, they would take all 5,000 out of that copay card. Then they wouldn't count it towards your out-of-pocket max. They would say, oh, we're going to set you back to 0 for February. Then you get your order for February and they take 5,000 more. And then they say, oh, because it didn't come out of your pocket, it came from a copay assistance plan, we're going to set you back to 0. So the third month you go again and they take 5,000 again. And they say, oh, this is the copay plan that's not out of your pocket. So they set you back to 0. Then you go in April and you try to pick up your product and you can't because it's $5,000 because they've taken all 15, but not given you any credit for it. Another really easy way to understand this, and this is what I used when I testified with the legislature, was think about college student. You're told your tuition, room, and board is $30,000 for the year. You go on, you get scholarships for 25,000 of that. So it would be like the university saying, because that money didn't come out of your pocket, we're going to take the 25,000, but you still owe us 30,000. So that's the basic way to understand what a copay accumulator is.
Yeah, thank you. When you, especially with that college metaphor, I think it lays it out pretty clearly.
Mhm.
Um, but you mentioned the insurance industry, they do come opposed to these policies. What are some of the most common, challenges to copay accumulator ban legislation that you've heard?
So there's several different things that we hear. We hear that insurance rates are going to go up. But I can tell you for a fact that even when they collected our copay patient assistance program, or took all of the money from it, our family that year they took $90,000, and we owed 5 as our out-of-pocket max, but they took 90,000. They still raised our rates the next year. So they've been collecting the copay accumulators in Oregon for 5 years. And every year, the marketplace plans have all gone up consistently. So even while they're collecting them, the rates are still going up. So that's number one. They always say accumulator means if we don't get to collect them, our rates are going to go up for sure. But actually, there's several different studies that have shown in the states that have passed them. There are now 18 states, Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia, that have all passed bans on copay accumulators. The 19th state is about to get signed in Texas. And so all of those states, they've done some studies, so prior to 2023, and they found that insurance rates were negligible. Like they rarely, they went up with the normal market increases. There weren't significant increases. So that's probably the biggest issue. The second thing they say is that insurance comes out with, typically, they'll come out with like an amendment or a suggestion that if you use a copay plan, you don't just they don't just collect what they owe for your out-of-pocket max. So let's use my example again, $5,000. If you give any money from that copay assistance plan, then insurance gets to collect all of it. So in other words, we'll count your 5,000, but we'll still collect the other 10,000. So that's basically a way of increasing drug prices because there's no company that can afford to pay out that much money and not raise their prices somewhere else. So that those are the two biggest things that we hear when we talk a lot about insurance. They also, what we've been told by several legislators is that they're concerned that they don't want to look like they're voting on the side of big pharma. But honestly, prices are expensive all around. I don't like the manufacturer prices. I don't like the fact that insurance collects so much money. I think what you're doing is not siding with the consumer. So by voting against us or not allowing it to move through the process, you're really hurting the consumer. You're not hurting either of those two big businesses. It's really just the consumer that's hurt in this whole scenario.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I know like in Oregon, the sponsors of the bill, at least this session, it is bipartisan, right? It should
Mhm.
be sort of this common sense approach to lowering drug costs. It's an easy tool that we well, I won't say easy, I guess, because it's taken a few years, right? But my last question for you is could you talk to your experience advocating and how you bring other groups, on board and how you work to to move the needle on this issue in your state?
Sure. So in 2021, we got really far. We made it all the way through the Senate and onto the into the House Healthcare Committee. And unfortunately, that was right at the time that there was a drug transparency bill that died on the floor. And so the House Healthcare Committee was really upset by that. That was their sort of their baby, and they really wanted that drug transparency bill. So they were trying to put language from that drug transparency bill into the legislation that had come over from the Senate. And because there were other backdoor agreements that were all made, nobody could come to an agreement on the kind of language that could go into that bill or couldn't go into that bill. So in the end, it died in the House Healthcare Committee in 2021. So we came out of that, a big coalition of us, and we said, this is not going to happen again. We're going to have a better concerted effort. We worked with the two sponsors, Senator Knopp and Senator Gelser-Bluen, and we said, what do we need to do to prepare for the 2023 session? So we spent all of 2022 creating materials and meeting with people behind the scenes to make sure we had the right language we wanted in there. We included things like state employee plans so that we would protect anybody that's on OEB or PEB so that they would not be ever subjected to an accumulator. And so we had done a lot of work, put a video together, pulled together a coalition of a lot of organizations, advocacy organizations like ours, and felt like we had just the right kind of year, that we were moving ahead. And we went into it thinking that the Senate was not going to be a problem because it was the same Senate committee chair. There were a few new committee members on the Senate, but we didn't really feel like they were going to be an issue. And ironically, it was an issue, and it originally died in the Senate. There was a hearing, but it was never called up for a working session. And we were told by Senator Patterson that it was because she didn't want to look like she was voting in favor of Big Pharma. But we tried every way to explain to her that it had nothing to do with Big Pharma. It wasn't supporting Big Pharma. It was really supporting consumers. So then we have a legislative consultant who worked with us in the Capitol, and that individual's name is George Okulich. And George worked really, really hard on the House side to find a piece of legislation that we could attach this to that was already out of the Senate. So we found one, and we were so excited. It was Senate Bill 608, and it mentioned prescription drugs, so it was an opportunity for us to put this in. We had enough committee votes. We were ready to go. And then with the Senate Republican walkout, unfortunately, the bill would have had to have gone back to the Senate because they needed a consensus vote. And so instead of that, what happened in the end is that the House Behavioral Health and Healthcare decided to remove our amendment from the original Senate bill so that all it had to do was pass out of the House Behavioral Health and Healthcare Committee and then onto the House floor and onto the governor. If our amendment had stayed in, it would have had to go back to the Senate. And we know that everything is dying in the Senate. So it was really a compromise in the end to save the original bill. So essentially, twice now, we've gotten sort of stuck in the politics of the building. And it's not really the merits of the bill that caused it to die, but it's the politics of the building. So we've been working with Representative Noce, and we're quite confident that there's going to be a piece of legislation in 2024 in the short session. It may be a committee bill. It may be the same sponsors. We're not exactly sure. It may also be grouped with other things related to medical insurance or prescription drug out of the committee itself, but we're not going to give up. Let's just put it that way. We're not going to give up. We're coming back with another option. And even if it takes another couple of years, we're hoping that we're going to get this through. And now that there's about to be 19 states, a bigger majority of the states across the United States are passing this, and it's time that Oregon jumped on the bandwagon as well.
Agreed. Well, I actually do have one more question for you, if you don't
Sure.
mind. I know that you're on your way to our nation's capital next week. There's a federal effort, right, around a national ban, and you said there's 20 states that have passed this sort of legislation. Obviously, it'd be great if we had something at the federal level that could take care of this. what's the status of the federal conversation?
Sure. So it's super positive right now. Thank goodness we have bipartisan support for that. It's called the HELP Act in Washington. So we're hoping that next week when we're meeting with legislators out there that we're going to get some positive responses. I think from Oregon, it's not going to be an issue, or at least I hope not. So far, our legislative group seems to be pretty interested in this and realizes the importance of it. Um, so we're really quite confident that this year could be the year for this. We're hoping that I'm going to take part in um, a Hill Day next week and then actually a virtual one in 2 weeks. So I think there's going to be a constant effort throughout the year to kind of keep going back to each of these offices and make sure that it gets further or at least passed, hopefully, this year. So because there's two bills, there's one on each side, the House and the Senate. We're hoping that that's going to make it much more successful.
Awesome. Well, Madonna, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me about this really important issue. And I know that we share a lot of the same goals around trying to address it on behalf of patients and just really appreciate your commitment and your dedication on behalf of your family and for all of patients, all chronic patients around Oregon. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.